welcome to my channel, man. We got something very, very special. This is the Ruff Ryders Chronicles recaps. This is episode 1. Now, if you can tell, I'm kind of super excited about this because I was a huge Ruff Ryder fan growing up. I had all kinds of double R shirts, man. I used to wear the bandana to the side, pulled like X used to wear it. I had a chain, had the double R chain on. It was fake, but you know, we got a little bit of real gold now, mama, so we made it. But before we get any further, man, shout out to the notification gang. Y'all encourage me to keep making these, man. I'm trying to respond to everybody's comment. If you're new to the channel, like my content, hit the subscribe button, turn on your notifications. You can be a part of the notification gang. But hey, I'm not gonna hold y'all up anymore. This is episode 1 of the Ruff Ryders Chronicles. Starting it off, they take us into the backgrounds of D and Waah, the two brothers that actually started Ruff Ryders, and their 4 other siblings that they had. Growing up in the South Bronx in the 70s, so we all know it was drugs and everything going on. Buildings are ran down, homeless people everywhere, and for them it's just an everyday struggle. But they used the streets as their education. They called it the Harvard, you know, school of hard knocks. The streets teach you everything. But within this community, the family is always the most important thing. Now, this family, they had 6 kids. They grew up in a very small apartment, you know, typical story for Black people, a little bit deprived, a little underpaid, living in poverty, but you make the best of it with what you can. And this family, they real close together. Now, like I said, D and Waah, they're the 2 younger brothers, so they always had the closest niche, you know, saying closest to each other. And for them 2, they always stayed together, and no matter what one did, the other one was going to do, because they wanted to make sure that both of them were always straight, because they were playing buddies. And at the end of the day, that's all you got is your brother. The family grew up with a Muslim dad and a Christian mother. So the kids were pretty much raised on Muslim, like, hey, go outside, you gotta work, you gotta work. If you don't work, you don't eat. So they were always getting pushed to, hey, do something, you gotta be doing something, stay active. But along with the parents clashing because they weren't seeing eye to eye with the religion, one day the father's corner store had ended up catching on fire, and he didn't have insurance on it, so they lost all the money for that. And at that point, that's what really drove the 2 parents apart. Then later on, the mother ended up losing her job, and she even said there were nights that the kids wouldn't eat, and they definitely remember those nights. But she loses her job, so she's not able to take care of 6 kids, so they got to split them up. The 3 oldest kids stay with the mother. The 3 younger ones, the 2 brothers, D and Waah and Chivon, they all moved with their grandmother to Philly. Once she passed, the grandmother passed, the sister moves back to Jersey, and the 2 brothers moved to New York with their dad, and they're moving all throughout the city. Now, one thing about moving to different cities, especially at a young age, is you're always going to meet people, but like Waah said, not all of them are always going to be good. So they ran into some people that were kind of shady, but at the time they still, you know, teenagers and young. At this point, Waah and D, they're just teenagers, they out and about. Waah ends up getting locked up at 13 for like little robbery and some silly stuff, but he pretty much starts writing his brother like, hey man, this is what you need to do when you're in prison, because people gonna be in there, they're gonna be trying you and stuff. So he's pretty much teaching his brother like, this is what you have to do in jail, since he's already been in there. And the reason they started getting involved in the streets is because the dad wasn't around as much, so the Muslim in him wasn't really staying focused, getting your job done, trying to survive. It was, let me see what these kids are doing over here, the bad seeds. So once Waah gets released, one day he's at the pool hall, and he said he's sitting there talking to a guy, and the man's like, what would you do if you were to get shot at? And Waah's like, shoot, I don't know, what would you do? And he's pretty much like, hey, I would zigzag when I'm running, you know what I'm saying? So he could, oh, they shooting, you dodge it. Oh man, Waah said he went outside a couple of minutes later, and there was a guy that approached him with a gun. So he gave him 100 ones, like, man, you trying to rob me? Huh, here you go. So he gave him the money and he ran off. But before he ran off, the guy pulled the trigger and it jammed. So at this point, he's like, oh, I definitely got to get out of here. So he runs and starts zigzagging and gets hit. He gets hit in his back, so the zigzagging didn't work. He ends up going to the hospital, and he wakes up in the morning. His mother gets a phone call that her son's in the hospital. When they get there, the bullet is in his heart. But they don't remove the bullet because it's not hurting him, and if they do remove it, there's a potential chance of his dying. So they just leave the bullet in him, because if it's not hurting, don't fix it. So he still has a bullet in his chest. At this time, Heavy D is starting to blow up. It's Heavy D, Diddy, all these record labels are starting to come up, and Waah and D, they looking at it like, man, I just got shot, man. We've been going to jail. How can we get in the music industry and get away from the life that we live and try to make some legit money? It turns out Heavy D had a brother that hung out with them on the block. One day they seen Heavy D pull up, entourage, you know what I'm saying, gold chains, everything. And they talking to Heavy D like, hey, we know you have a, you know what I'm saying, little deal over there at Uptown. How can we get in this game? So Heavy D is like, I'm glad you asked that, because at this moment I'm looking for artists. If you can find me a gold talent artist that can make songs and we can take them to the next level, oh, I want them. Turns out that D's boy, he's on the block with a guy named Tiny. Tiny has a cassette on him. He's like, hey man, I got somebody. He hands Heavy D a DMX mixtape. And he's like, man, I this guy, man, I know this guy, he raps. And they listen to it and they like, oh, this is it right here. Who is he? And we need to get him right now. So Waah's telling Tiny, hey, we need to go find this DMX character right now. Because what they were hearing, they're like, oh, this is nice, man. We can get him with Heavy D. Hey, we can get up out the hood, you know? The same night, they riding around trying to find DMX. They end up finding DMX, and he gives his side of the story also. What he says is, I'm from the streets. So when he sees a car pull up, he's stepping back like, man, I don't know who this is. But Tiny hops out like, man, this is my man Waah. He trying to get in the music business, and he heard your stuff. He wants you to work with him. So X is like, all right, cool. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to get my raps out there anyway. You know what I'm saying? Y'all got my cassette. So Waah was like, yeah, man, I'm going to come and get you tomorrow at 11 o'clock. DMX shows him the window that he's staying in. And he's like, hey, 11 o'clock the next morning, he's knocking on the window like, hey, yo. Pretty much like, hey, DMX, let's go, man. We got to get on this grind. It's time to start working. And DMX is like, all right, cool, because this is what I wanted. And, hey, from there, this is where Ruff Ryders are starting to come together. Heavy D told them, if you can find an artist, then you can get you a record label up off the ground. And DMX is the first person they found. So you got the two owners and the guy Tiny that knows them. Now let's bring DMX. Now it's four of us. Growing up for DMX was tough. Being with his mom, he pretty much said being confident, you couldn't do that in his house. If you were confident, you would get beat. You know what I'm saying? If you would say anything that was smart, you would get your ass whooped. So for DMX, it was just tough being able to express himself as a child. It was so bad that he said during the summer, he would just stay in his room the whole summer. Look out the window, he'll see the kids playing. He would only come out of his room to use the bathroom. But when he did go out, he would go to his friend's house, and they noticed he would come over with marks on his back, his arm, and face and stuff, and he wasn't really eating. So they would always, his friend and his mother, would always make sure he ate whenever he came over to the house, because they knew what he was going through at his house. Those weren't living conditions for a kid, man. And DMX really just had it, he just had it bad. And eventually, his mother took him to a place for boys and just kids, and she ended up leaving him there. So for him, the bond that he had with his mother was like, you can't just leave me here. You know what I'm saying? We're just gonna look around. You can't leave me here. I'm your kid. We came together. But he said at that moment is when he figured, anything that's bothering me, I need to just ball it up and put it behind me. And I just got to keep going and focus on me and figure out what I'm going to do with myself. While DMX was in the home for children, he said at that time hip hop was starting to come up and rapping. He was either rapping, you was a D-boy, you was dancing, you was a DJ, or you was like graffiti, and he just started rapping. So once he actually got out, he went back home and he went back to Yonkers, and he was out on the street, and he knew a guy named Reddy Rhyme that he actually looked up to. And that's the only guy in life that he ever looked up to, like, damn, I want to be just like him. He also said that Reddy Rhyme is the first guy he seen roll up a blunt. So at the age of 14, DMX seen that, and he offered DMX a blunt, but it turned out it was, you know, it was laced with crack. But DMX said, man, if I looked up to you like that, you were my role model, then why would you do that to me? I was only 14 years old. Why would you give me something with crack in it? But then DMX also says, if it wasn't for Reddy Rhyme, I also wouldn't have got into rapping, because he's the one that told me, man, maybe you should start writing your rhymes down and actually taking rap serious. So it's a love-hate for him, because without Reddy Rhyme telling him to rap, we would have never got a DMX on the level we got to. But at the same time, he messed up DMX, man. That we all knew DMX had, you know, saying drug problems and stuff. DMX is rapping and stuff since he's in Yonkers. He's pretty much a battle rapper, and at this point, he's super nice. So if there's anyone that ever rapped against DMX at these times during these battles, DMX said he would, after he beats them, they would be like, oh man, X, for real, man, that was hard, man, I'm a fan. So he would beat people and turn them into fans. And also when his boys said, if anyone thought they were better than DMX, they would set the battle up, go to wherever they at, and X would just battle them and beat them. X was nice, man, everywhere. He was in all kinds of battles. They had him at all kinds of little talent shows and stuff, but they were trying to get his, saying his name out there. So at this point, he's putting together his little cassette, and D and Wine, this is when they meet him. They find out that X is already in an agreement with the guy. But it's pretty much nothing serious. This guy has a house, and they got to go to the house and try to get X off this contract. He has a Rottweiler that they take, and they tie him up in the backyard because the guy uses it as security on the front steps. So when it barks, you know someone's coming up. They tie the dog up. They come in the house, and they pretty much tell him, like, hey, man, we want DMX. We don't want no problems. Go ahead and sign them over for us so we can get DMX and we can start getting them rolling. So that's what ends up happening. They had to go do a little, a little negotiation, but they ended up getting DMX. Now, if you remember the sister, Chivon, she ended up moving to Atlanta with their uncle. The uncle promoted clubs, and he had all kinds of acts up under him. Any big name act that was coming down to Atlanta, he probably booked them or promoted for them. So Chivon's down there, and D's like, man, I'm not really involved in music. So Waah was like, all right, let me get in touch with her and let's see what she can do. It turns out their uncle is friends with P. Diddy's dad. So they contact P. Diddy, and things are starting to take off. So they bring Chivon back up to New York. They like, all right, we got something. We got Diddy. We got a little bit of people behind us, but we need a name. They came up with the name Special Effects. Special Effects wasn't jumping off like they thought it would. So they were watching a movie, and her and the brother they watching, and it was like, dang, that was rough. Pretty much they were watching some people on some horses. And then the brother said, Ruff Ryders. And then she said, Ride or Die. And that's how the Ruff Ryders Ride or Die came up, from them watching a movie. It turns out Puff is a little bit too busy. He got Biggie coming out. He got a lot of stuff going on for himself. So he calls this producer, Chad Elliott. Chad Elliott's working with Jodeci and doing their album. So he's like, hey man, I got this guy. He got an artist named DMX. Would you be able to work with him? At this time, Chad Elliott, he doesn't have a studio or anything. He's just doing meetings up on the car. He actually meets them and he tells them, all right, cool. Let's make it happen. I can do a few things for you because I'm working with Jodeci. They end up getting a studio in his dad's building. They give him a studio and they start working. They putting DMX out. And at this point, it's like, all right, we got us a producer. We got us a couple of producers. We got them on the clock. All right, let's push DMX like we supposed to push him. Chris Little makes a few calls and he gets Ruff Ryders a little deal, but they don't get a full album deal. They get a single deal for DMX's Born Loser. This song doesn't take off like it's supposed to. If it took off, they would have been able to get a deal for an album. But they just got the solo and the single and it didn't do anything. Like, it was getting out there, but no one outside of Yonkers would listen to it. DJ Kid Capri knew them and he played it, but he says he's probably the only person that ever played that song. So at this point, everyone's like, man, dang, that's it, bro. Like, what are we gonna do, man? That song's supposed to be the hit, It's his first single. They got the buzz about him, but it just didn't click like they wanted it to. And they pretty much thought, hey, man, this rap stuff might be over, man. And DMX was like, man, that's only my first song. He expected so much for it, but it was only his first song, so he knew he could get better. It was just only a matter of time. Give me some more time, and I guarantee I'm gonna give you something. Elliott ends up having to go back on the road with Jodeci for their tour. So at this time, he introduces the Ruff Ryders to Irv Gotti. At this time, Irv Gotti was just DJing. He wasn't really producing nothing, anything, but Irv was like, all right, cool, I know a few people, I can make some things happen. I want to get in the music game also. So they end up meeting up with the Ruff Ryders and they bring Irv Gotti in. They like, hey man, I want you to be a producer and work in my studio. So Irv was like, all right, I'll do it, but y'all got to give me a drum machine. because he didn't have anything. He wasn't a producer at the time. He was just dabbling in it. So he wanted to figure it out. So Juan was like, all right, I'll get you that. And DMX actually made his first single, Make a Move, on his next album to an Irv Gotti beat. And if you didn't know, Irv Gotti wanted to sign DMX. He wanted to make a group with DMX, Jay-Z, and Ja Rule. I don't know if this show is going to cover that because it's not an Irv Gotti thing, but he wanted them in a group together at one point. This single, same thing. It didn't take off like they expected it to. So unfortunately for DMX, it's just like, man, this just getting hard, man. I got to make some money or somehow. But they did get a little in advance, so about $50,000 to $75,000. But that wasn't enough to keep going around and keeping everybody fed. So X had a child, and he had to do what he was doing as a teenager, back in the streets, robbing people. Said he robbed a lot of people. But he ended up getting locked up several times. He would go in for like a month, then maybe 3 months. He was just in and out of jail at these times because the rap wasn't working for him, so he had to make money somehow. But he was like, yeah, man, I got locked up one time, and I was like, man, this is it. Like, this is the charge they gave me, robbery. You know what I'm saying? So for him, he said, man, it reminded me of being a child back when I used to spend my summers in my room. And all he did was just write and write and write. And one thing they said was, DMX being locked up, what that did was give him a lot of material when he got out. A lot of material. Hey, that's episode 1 of the Ruff Ryders Chronicles. Let me know before we go any further. Comment below. Were you a fan of the Ruff Ryders? I know I was a huge fan of them, especially when they got the locks. Oh man, it was on. But hey, thanks for watching. I'm Moedotj. We'll be here next week for episode 2 and 3. And if you're new to the channel, man, please like, comment, share, subscribe to the channel, turn on your notifications, get something every time I drop. I'm out. Thank you for watching.
Jimmy on the beat, boy.